Hello and welcome everyone to the Capital Mind podcast. If you'd like to know more about us, visit capitalmind.in, and if you'd like to invest with us, do visit capitalmindwealth.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. Clients of Capital Mind may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of the Capital Mind podcast. It's been a very interesting few, weeks and months in that sense for the stock markets. If you look at US growth stocks, where I have some exposure, some of the high growth names that became darlings of the pandemic and really have done well over the last decade, in fact, they're down something like 50, 60, 70%. And when you ask what's the reason, one of the reasons given is inflation in the US is up to levels not seen since the 80s maybe, or something to that effect. And you've seen the inflation numbers come in at 6%. People first said it would be transient, and maybe it still will be, but it seems to be hanging around a bit and worrying everyone. And that at least has definitely manifested in some stock prices going down. If you look at India, well, inflation has always been with us. We've never really forgotten about it like the US seems to have done for the last 10, 12 years or something to that effect. So inflation has always been a bit of this something in the background or not so much in the background, depending on the election season, that we have to worry about. And right now, our inflation numbers also look similar to the US, right? Something like 6% or whatever. So I guess in today's podcast, we wanted to bring in Deepak and actually sort of ask you to tell us, look, when I look at this inflation, I'm told that this is a core inflation or it maybe isn't, or that this inflation has a lot of food or it has a lot of oil. And then when I look at my spending, I don't seem to be able to see that number match my spending. Sometimes my spending goes up year over year much more and sometimes much less. And you've talked about this quite a bit as well. So Deepak, can you tell us, can we just ignore the government and help us figure out what our inflation is?
Yeah, yes, Ray. In fact, I think the interesting thing about inflation is while the number seems to be like 6% when you talk about, but that's the inflation that's calculated for, say, the whole country, and how it's calculated is more complex than simple. But the idea is that they say, oh, well, you know what, on average, all of India spends 50% on food, and on average, India spends so much on. But this average doesn't mean that you're average, because it means you're a different person. Now, consider that inflation is just a basket of spending that you're doing. And this basket is never static, not even for you as a person. If you're spending 20% on food today, you may be spending only 10% tomorrow. Let me give you an example of where inflation will suddenly rise without any reason whatsoever that is not controllable by you. One, for instance, is let's say you got cancer tomorrow. Your medical bills go up, your eating out bills come down. Yeah. Suddenly what was 20% of your expenses, food, is now maybe 5% because your expenses have increased because of the cancer spend. And the other, let us say you're a couple that is currently spending X amount of money, and you suddenly have a child. The expenses on a child, and you'll discover the real cost of diapers only after you have a child. It is suddenly a lot more. You're now spending for 3 people. Your expenses are different. There's a layer of food and medical and vaccination and all sorts of other expenses that are different from what you used to spend earlier. The child goes to school, suddenly you have a school bill, which was not there for the first 4 or 5 years of his life or her life. And suddenly that school bill is just added to your inflation. Your personal spend as a number is very different. And then there's a deflationary part as well. So for instance, you're old enough that your child goes out of college or school, and you no longer have to worry about school expenses, the college expenses maybe you've kept a lump sum for. Your regular spends don't include that amount anymore. Now you're spending for 4 people rather than 1. And if you move out to a cheaper city or a more expensive city, Bangalore, Bombay is more expensive for rents, cheaper for food. Your basket changes, the way you spend changes. Because of this, every individual is different. And the way to handle this is to say, Shrey, calculate your expenses today roughly. You can't do any exact numbers. There are lots of apps that tell you exactness, but most of it is, I think, it's better to be inaccurate and roughly right than to be accurate and totally wrong. It may be useful for you to just track your overall numbers. So you may be spending, as a middle class person, today about 1 to 2 lakhs per
So
month.
upper middle class, perhaps.
Upper
more so,
middle
yeah.
class person will be spending 1 to 2 lakhs per month. I'm talking about, roughly Bangalore
Yeah.
person with a small
Maybe
family.
Capital Mind listeners.
Capital Mind listeners. I mean, that might be the range of how much you spend. And over time, that number, that broad number, how it changes is roughly what inflation you're experiencing. Now, to give you an example, I was in a rented house. I still live in a rented house. I was in a rented house about in 2007. I was paying something like 17,000 rupees per
In
month.
Bangalore?
In Bangalore. But it was more towards the center of town. Now I come out. I live in a much better house, a bigger house. But I roughly pay maybe only 2 times that. So in 15 years, from 2007 to 2022, my rental expenses have gone up 2x, which in inflationary terms means only about 5.5 to 6%. So in fact, less than 5%. But I now have 2 kids. So the school expense, my first child was probably, I mean, it was very, very young at the time. There were no school expenses in 2007. So today, from that base, it's some significantly higher. From zero, you might think it's infinity because the base is zero. But even if you took the year-on-year expense on education, I'm probably seeing a 10% increase in that. As a percentage of my overall basket, this is actually quite different. What has happened now is the amount I spend on certain things, which I used to spend a lot more in 2007 on alcohol, on partying, on certain other things, is a lot lesser. I barely, if anything, if ever drink, and we don't go partying in any
I mean, good
meaningful
luck.
way.
You have two kids.
Yeah, well, it's just the way it is. But I'm just older and all that stuff. So, and the stuff I really like to spend on, which is to travel, to mostly to Goa, because people who know, that's where I go. But anywhere else as well, the actual expenses on travel have not been significantly higher. Even in fact, to go from travel from India to say Dubai, even an air ticket in 1998 costs roughly about the same as it costs today. And in rupee absolute terms, nothing to including all the other stuff that's added. So it's your basket that determines how much your inflation has changed, and the elements of your basket will also change. It's like food was 20% at some point, kids were zero. And now kids are 20%, food is like 5% because you're mostly cooking at home. Every person's basket is different, and you'll find that your basket gets inadequately represented in the overall inflation numbers, and also inordinately impacted when the government changes certain rules. So, for a person traveling business class, now at that time I was not. India suddenly introduced a surcharge on business class tickets, and I was like, oh man, okay, bummer for those who travel business class, but I don't care.
Yeah.
So it didn't affect me, but to somebody who's traveling business class and paying for it, was like, oh my God, this is an expense that's increased. For them, that cost has suddenly gone up. So they're seeing that inflation. I am not. The basket of inflation changes on a regular basis. This is very interesting because I think what we're making a critical problem is that we're extrapolating the inflation of the past to an inflation that applies to us in the future. Sometimes this is wrong. It underestimates inflation. So before I have a child, if I start to estimate that my expenses will go up by only 5% a year, I'm not accounting for the fact that there are going to be more people in my family, and therefore I have to deal with it. It may be the exact other way around. When we're largely saving and investing for our retirement, when inflation may come in, but it may not be as much as it seems because our basket will change dramatically when we retire. We'll explore that more as we go along.
So, I mean, I have to say, you were saying this is an interesting problem. It sounds a bit hopeless to me as an individual because what we have, as you just described, is a constantly evolving basket. I mean, there are expenses that just don't exist that suddenly crop up and now are such a big part of it. And then they'll go away in maybe 18 or 22 or 25 years or something like that. And will just vanish and will no longer, or hopefully will just vanish and will no longer be part of your spending habits. On the other hand, there's all these shocks that can hit you, as that you also pointed out, both positive and negative, that completely change the picture as well. So I think my takeaway from your first sort of answer is that I guess it really is better to be like, did you call it? Imprecisely right than to be precisely wrong or whatever, because this is a very complicated problem. But and maybe then just to take a step back, why we care to some extent is when you look at inflation and you're like, this is how much something costs today. I mean, we're all, as you pointed out, planning for some retirement or some phase where perhaps you don't need to earn to be able to buy those things. And so you're trying to figure out how much I need. And on that, so how should one think about their investments in the constant context of this ever-changing basket with ever-changing inflations? I mean, how do you think of investments in this or how do you advise us to think of it?
I try to always say this, that sometimes we end up trying to save too much or without an idea of where that goal is. The goal is the money itself, not what it can do for you. But if we change that mentality of saying, listen, I want to save for a certain purpose. I want to save to be able to say, this money can take care of me when I retire. Then actually what you're saying is my investment should be able to meet my inflationary needs. So inflation based needs. So if I'm spending X a month, that X is going to become 2X, then my investment should be able to generate that 2X per month till I
don't need it anymore. Okay.
Yes. If I started to invest in 2007, inflation at that time appeared like it would be 8 or 9%.
Isn't this the era of like what, 10 or 11% FDs or something?
Yes, it was about 8-9% FDs, and maybe 2007 was a little bit lesser. We did in 2008 have 11% FDs. Interestingly, that if that was the FD rate that you were thinking, you would have also thought inflation would be that much.
Yeah, why not, right? Yeah.
And you'd plan for that, and then you'd end up with this hopeless exercise of at 10% inflation, my spend doubles every 7 years. And if 15 years, I should have been 4x of what it is. And another 15 more years to retire, I'm thinking if I'm 4x of what I should have been in 2007 and I'm spending 1 lakh a month, then I should be spending 4 lakhs a month today. And in 15 years, I should be spending 16 lakhs a month. Now, I'm thinking of this in 2007 when I was not even in my 40s. Here's where, you start thinking, oh, you know what, when I retire, I need 16 lakhs a month. 16 lakhs a month is a lot of money.
And that keeps growing too, right? In this math.
At 16 lakhs a month, I need a corpus to earn me 16 lakhs a month is about 2 crores a year.
Yeah. Okay.
So I need a corpus to earn me 2 crores a year. But it's increasing. So I need 20 crores or 30 crores of a corpus to be able to get there. Now, 30 crores is a lot of money, but when in 2007, I'm thinking, listen, that's going to happen 30 years from now. So I'll somehow manage to get the 30 crores. 15 years down the line, I suddenly realized I don't need that 30 crores because I'm not spending that 4 lakhs a month today. And therefore, I have to recalibrate. This recalibration helps me because then I say, well, you know what? I don't have to chase that insane fortune that I decided was based on inflation of my thoughts in 2007. But it can recalibrate to where we are right now.
So I'll just pause you there for 1 second, which is, I think many people have this criticism, including some people in Capital Mind, that when financial planners come to you and say, this is how much money you need for retirement, it's this hopelessly large number which means nothing. And then the response, which, the math shows you is, well, don't worry about it too much, just invest in this much in equities, this much in debt, and you'll get there. These exercises, as you say, maybe we think about them in the wrong way, or there's more to this, because if you just try and solve it through math, the numbers it's play money. It feels like monopoly money at some point.
Yeah, at some level, you're thinking you need so much just to retirement, and then you need something for your kids' education, something for a house, something. So the problem really is that when we think of inflation as a number, it just seems to be a linearly increasing number. But I can tell you this, when you're 60, your expenses will change. I don't think my kids will want to stay with me. So I don't have to take care of their living expenses, which is deflationary for me, right? I will probably own my house by that time, in which case I don't have rent to pay, which is a significant amount of my expenses today. So I don't have to deal with that. I have lesser mouths to feed, lesser people to plan for when I plan a vacation. Therefore, a retirement expense to me is not, even if I took my linear inflation from here, which is say X, to 2X, because it is 15 years from now and I'm expecting only 5 or 6% inflation, it might actually go from say a 1 to 2, or say, give a number. I'm not giving actual numbers, but let's say a number is 2 lakhs per month today that you're spending on, including your vacations and school fees and all that. I don't have school fees. I don't have rent. I don't have the same amount of travel bills that I do. My 2 lakhs will become 4 lakhs if I were spending the exact same basket. But because that basket has changed, it's actually, I'm going down to coming back to spending 2 lakhs a month 15 years down the line. So whatever number I needed, I need half of that to be able to meet my real retirement expenses. Maybe a little bit more because I want to travel maybe more times a year than I do today. So roughly speaking, my actual inflation to the point at which I retire is 10%. Yeah. There's another thing. If I retire today and this is Deepak Shenoy speaking, but I think a lot of the knowledge economy is like this. It's not like I do a lot of physical labor. I should perhaps, but I don't do a lot of physical labor working. It's the mind, and the mind doesn't really slow down too much. In fact, it gets richer as you grow older. So the chances are that after you're 60, you can continue to work and people will value your work. So there is an amount of passive income that can also come in, or active income that can come in. And this changes your dynamic again. It says, well, you know what, I saved all this money and then now I still have an income and I don't need it. And people build their income in different ways. They buy a house that gives them a rent. They write a book. I mean,
Well, you write a book at least, so
I
some
wrote
of the rest of us not so much. I'll actually go back to that other thread you were saying, and then I cut you off, which was about one of our podcast listeners actually suggested this point, which was when you look at, I think you were just getting here, that when you look at the factors affecting inflation, there are some interesting factors here, and technology is a very big one of them. So do you think we could look at that a bit? Because inflation isn't just a straight line up, right? I mean, as you pointed out, there's these huge basket changes, but make things even more complicated. There's some factors at play that just change baskets entirely in a better way. I mean, it's not like I'm old now, so I'm not going to order from Swiggy as much. It's actually like I just don't need to spend on this anymore. Maybe you could talk a bit more about technology and how things evolve.
Yeah, this
and
is
other
actually
factors.
quite dramatic because if you think about where we are, and when I was just before I was getting married, my wife and I would talk all the time. My phone bills were 8 to 10,000 rupees per month.
Which year is this?
This is 2005.
That's a very big number.
Today, I spend 2,400 rupees per year and I have 4 SIM cards at home. So if you add up all the four, that's still less than 10,000 rupees, which was my monthly bill. And I have unlimited phone calls, internet access, which is reasonably fast, so fast that if my house internet broadband shuts down, I can just switch on any of the phones and I'd have an internet Wi-Fi connection through that. I've had a dramatically higher experience for a much lower cost. So what has happened really is that it's an evolution of technology. Well, you know what was the problem earlier? That you had to, when you made a phone call, there was a license fee for having that phone call. If you called outside of the state, somebody had to get paid a higher amount. If you called outside the country, you have paid a higher amount. Technology changed all of that. They said, well, you know what? It doesn't cost any different if you have an internet connection. So I can use the IP layer to make calls much more efficient. And therefore, it costs me the same whether I call you and you're in the next room versus when I call you and you're in like San Francisco. Today, the costs of communication have come down quite dramatically. So what used to be a significant percentage of my expense bill at that time is now nearly nothing in comparison with what it was. And like this, you can take a lot of other aspects. Today, I spend 10 rupees per kilometer on a petrol car or a diesel car. At best, it's 1 to 2 rupees per kilometer for an electric car. And this is now when the technology is nascent. I can expect that it will get better and better in the days to come. But let's say cost of energy went up double. I would pay 4 rupees per kilometer. That is still 60% savings from the 10 rupees I pay today. So we know the world is going electric. There is absolutely no doubt about it. It's not because of environmental factors. It's because it's 60% more efficient per liter of per kilometer traveled to use it. This means that come 10 years from now, if everything is electric, I am spending 60% less than I'm spending today. And perhaps that is deflation. And that's deflation that is staring me right in the face. So if today my transportation cost is maybe 10% of income, it is going to be 4% of income.
For the same
amount driven. Chances I'll drive a little more, but okay, how much more will you drive? I mean,
Well, it might be less actually, for all you know.
For all you know. And then you add a layer and then say, well, you know what, having your own car is X. But if you didn't have your own car, there would be a metro. And in the metro, and we'll come to that later point, but the metro will reduce costs a little more. You don't have to pay so
I
much
think
for parking.
more than a little more, right? I mean,
Yes. So, for instance, if I just said, coming to the Capital Mind office is 6 kilometers. I spend 60 rupees a day coming and 60 rupees a day going. That's 120 rupees a day just coming in and going. In an electric car, it falls to maybe 60% of that. So instead of 120 rupees a day, I'm spending 50 rupees a day. There's a metro that turns up that takes me to the Capital Mind office straight. And suddenly I'm spending 10 rupees a day or 15 rupees a day or 20 rupees a day. So now your expenditure is largely dependent on how the world evolves around you. And you can expect that it will evolve in a positive way simply because there are cost savings to these and cost benefits to making these changes, whether it's a metro, whether it's better roads, whether it's electric cars, that is going to happen. Take the other expense, food. Food has global warming coming. We know that it's warming. The world is warming. Either way, as we know, let us say that there is a 1 degree warming coming up in the next 50 years. No matter how you look at it, there is a very significant body of research that says yields on farms will only increase as the CO2 levels in the atmosphere rise. By nature, there is actually more concentration of carbon dioxide and a more concentration of temperature. The temperature is higher in a greenhouse and yields are higher. Plants grow faster, plants can grow at night. And so there is a significant body of research that tells us that there is more yield. It may not be in comparison saying, so for every 1 degree will the yield double, but you know that it's going to go up. If the yield goes up, that means per hectare of farmland, a farmer will be able to produce more. And if there is more supply and the world grows, because typically the world is growing by about 1 to maybe roughly by 1% a year in terms of births and 0.8% per year in terms of deaths. So there isn't so much of an increase in population that is net happening in the world today. If that continues, that means there's going to be more yield increases, which is going to be 2 to 5% a year versus just a 1% or 0.5% a year in terms of actual people increase, which means that the supply of food will increase. This demand for food will not increase quite as much. Prices of food items, the core food items, is likely to come down. And this is across the board. So if you see whether it's onions used to be 10 rupees a kg in 2007 at the lowest point of the year. And today also they're 10 rupees a kg at the lowest point of the year. It's the difference now is that you can get the same onion for 30 rupees a kg if you buy it on site A, 40 rupees a kg if you buy it in an upscale supermarket, and maybe 10 or 11 rupees if you go to a wholesale bazaar. These avenues are always available to you in different ways, but that's like saying coffee costs 300 rupees at Starbucks and 10 rupees at my local Darshini. So, what is the price of coffee? We think that the farmers, we have to get richer. But they're not, it's not because we're selling food cheap. It's because they get a very small percentage of the price we pay of food. For an onion that sells at 10 rupees, they might probably get 1 rupee of that kg. It's because of bad practices of harvesting, which damages the goods, bad practices of transportation, which ruins the goods, bad practices of storage that increases spoilage. All of these items add a cost. And because of that, you can pay only the farmer only 1 rupee. If you fix these items, get better harvesting techniques, get better storage techniques, get better transportation, cold storage and so on, you can actually reduce the spoil. And who will do this? It's only technology that will do this, because you'll get, you can use electric technology to cool things. With energy availability increasing, you can actually reduce this. So the farmers can get the 2 rupees instead of 1 rupee. Now remember, they're making more kilograms because they have global warming and increased yields. So they're making more kilograms output. They're getting more per kilogram because of the efficiencies in the system. And because of the same efficiencies, we'll pay 8 rupees per kg instead of 10. So we get a 20% saving. They get a 100% increase, and the middleman still makes a bulk, which is 6 rupees versus the 9 rupees that he's currently making. But the 6 rupees will be earned by somebody else. Now, who that somebody else is, we don't know. But somebody else, somebody in the chain who is not the current middleman, is likely to make the maximum out of this whole game. What this means is food costs will come down. Now, there's another thing. For instance, if you like to order food, if core food is coming down, that's one of the biggest costs of the restaurant. What's the other biggest cost? It's probably rent, because your location, etc. Rent has changed because Swiggy or Zomato, which has come in, which have used tech to do certain things, they've introduced one phenomenon that said, listen, you can cook from anywhere and I'll get it delivered to the person. So you make your dishes look attractive on a little phone, and I can now get food delivered to that person and market your whole thing for a cost. This allows people to say, I'll reduce my rental cost. A restaurant's costs can come down by just changing the place it is at and run entirely out of cloud kitchens. You might think this is new, but this is not. If you think about the Bombay's, those Dabbawalas, they were the oldest Swiggies. They are a efficient way of taking food from a person's home to a person's office. It may not even be his home. He can order it from somebody else's home, and that person can cook for a lot of people. That's a cloud kitchen there, right there. And they can make an extra amount of income beyond what they are. And now you commercialize it and call it a kitchen, and therefore it's a restaurant that actually does the same thing. So what's changed because of this? Packaging. Earlier, they would just throw stuff into whatever package. Now you have little bowls and nice little things and all that stuff. Delivery, they fix the point of said today. If you hire a delivery person and you tell him, listen, you've got to go from place A to place B, he'll say, well, fine, yeah, just tell me how much you're going to pay me, and then I'm ready. That's also because of technology, because he knows, looking at point A and point B, exactly how many kilometers it's going to take, how much time it's going to take, because now you have the traffic mapped in there, and that allows him to determine his cost a lot better. And any layer of efficiency there, whether it's a better traffic route that he can take to get to your place, whether you use an electric vehicle to get to your place, or whether he can take multiple orders that fall along the same route, it reduces his cost and therefore reduces the overall cost. So eventually, while the pricing currently may not appear like it's, this whole concept will create a model that just reduces the cost of the food that you make. So 10 years later, we may still be paying the 200 rupees a dish that we are paying now on any given restaurant in Swiggy or Zomato, but we may not be using Swiggy or Zomato. We may be using a different paradigm, an app to do this. This actually means that if you're able to quantify and predict the time and the cost of a delivery, that you could deliver food from place A to place B. They've already started to take this one level higher and say, why is it only food? Why can't I do a 5-star bar at one place? So there's 10-minute delivery because they've gotten, I mean, it's insane. I understand. But I like the concept, because what they're doing is saying, listen, we can quantify and predict it. If they can quantify and predict it and get it to scale, they can build it in a way that reduces the cost to you dramatically. It is crazy. Day before yesterday, I wanted some Diet Coke. I ordered 4 Diet Cokes. In 10 minutes, it was there. And I was like, this. I have a vending machine in our building. I don't know if it has Diet Coke because you have to check an app to see it. In the time that it would have taken me to have opened the app and gone downstairs and done this, somebody delivered it to me for free. Of course, for free, I have to thank the VCs for. But assuming that there is some layer of profit in all of this, and some kind of a profit pool in all of this that they can share, I think this is ridiculously efficient. So think of all of these as removing the middleman. Every layer of efficiency that you're adding in is actually reducing inflation, not by directly influencing it, but by making more paradigms available. Internet was designed for military, and then now everybody uses it for everything else in the world. I don't think people thought it would be used for,
Well, ordering 4 Diet Cokes, as you just.
it's come to a point where I think the technological improvement in our lives is dramatic. So there is actually a lot of effort right now going on to change consumer behavior in order for them to say, listen, let's just sit back and do this, rather than the original thing, which was to step over to a shop. It turns out now, though, that the original paradigm may have actually gone to a point where those original players also have realized layers of efficiency. To give you an example, it used to be that Amazon and Flipkart were the cheapest places to buy things, certain things. It's turning out increasingly that they're not. And one of the reasons they're not is because the shops themselves have started to get better and better at their own delivery and processes. There was this big, fight. Local shops in Maharashtra were starting to order. Now, a shop is a shop. You go to the shop to order. So you would have thought the disruption would be that people in their houses would use an app to order the same thing. People don't have the patience for apps. They always want to go to the shop and buy their quick thing in 5 minutes and come back. They're not like me, who have the patience to order on an app for even 4 Diet Cokes. So the shopkeeper, where does he get his stuff from? Typically, the idea was they would get their stuff from these wholesalers who would send their people over. Now, the people were inefficient. They would say, "Yaar, aaj nahi aa raha hoon, kal aa raha hoon. I'm coming tomorrow. I'm coming day after tomorrow, because you know what? Not enough on your route." And you're saying, listen, I need some shampoo. Why don't you just come? And it's not. So what a Reliance did in this case was to say, listen, why are you ordering from your wholesaler? I'll give you an app. You order from me. I'll have the same stuff delivered to you cheaper, because I'm the super wholesaler. Okay. Yeah, it's the shop. So now the shop, whose idea of getting it cheap was either order from the wholesaler and beg him to deliver, or go to a D-Mart and get it at a 2% discount, now gets a 5% discount plus credit from a Reliance. So the wholesaler is saying, listen, I am screwed because so you're coming to this point where I think a lot of this efficiency in the middleman is actually translating not just to the layer of apps and the end users, but also to the intermediate supply chains going around. I think the more we allow technology to reduce the middleman, the more we must make efforts to encourage competition to sustain. So, if, for instance, you should never have a situation where Amazon looks at you and says, if you list on Flipkart, I'm going to charge you 10% more. Or a Reliance looks and says, well, if you order even 5% from your wholesaler, I will charge you more. You should not allow them to do that. This is anti competitive. PVR has already been dinged to a certain extent about this. You've got monopolies and semi monopolies in areas. Now, this is a natural nature. So, Intel was a monopoly in the chip space until
everything else happened.
Yes. So there was a point at which they could have abused their monopoly, but the US laws are very, very strong. They don't allow you to abuse these monopolies in any meaningful way. And they break up companies when they become super monopolies in certain areas.
And they prevent M&A and stuff.
And they prevent M&A and stuff. So there's a lot. So India also has that. For instance, PVR, when it bought a certain movie chain, they said you're going to be a monopoly in this area, so you can't do certain things. Okay. Now, but in India, those laws are relatively lax. So, for instance, even now, if you go to a PVR, all of them have kind of said, listen, if you come into our theaters, you can't bring your own food and I will overcharge you for popcorn and food. Now, this should be at some point handled by having competitive movie chains who say you can bring your own food.
Or our food is cheaper.
Our food is cheaper. But it's not happening because they're a monopoly, and this is not, and you think this is a bad thing because it's inflation, right? Because this is stuff that cost me 50 rupees a ticket earlier now cost me 300 rupees a ticket plus 300 rupees of popcorn plus so on and so on. But I have the added experience of it being a PVR, so I'm getting more value than I was from my earlier.
Not so great movie hall, yeah.
So now, of course, there is a value differential, but I think the price differential is substantially higher. So I do have inflation. What disrupted PVR was not another movie exhibitor.
So not Inox per se.
Not Inox. It was Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hotstar and all of these guys who said, why do you even want someone to force only popcorn and crappy coffee with you on you when you're watching a movie? Instead, watch it at home and we'll stream it over. It's super fast because Reliance Jio has now disrupted internet and so has Airtel and so on. So now you have super fast internet at your house. You can watch it. You can cook your own food. And you know what? If you don't want to cook your own food, order from your Swiggies and Zomatos or whatever, or Domino's Pizza or whatever it is. And you have the movie going experience at home. And you might say, well, it's a small TV. No, but now you got 65-inch TVs for a ridiculously low cost. You get sound systems that make your hall into a movie theater. You have equipment that makes it feel exactly the same. And if you want it, and you know what, you can watch this anytime. You can watch this at 11 in the night, which is when you get free from all the work and all the kids and all that stuff, which no theater will have a show after. But you have one. You can have it at your own house. So the PVRs and are getting disrupted, but not by the fact that they were a monopoly in exhibition, but they were not a monopoly in people consuming movies. To a certain extent, inflation has gone up in certain cases. Like if you look at the pure cost of going to a movie, it has gone up. Sure. But for me to consume a movie today is actually down because I can say, listen, you know what? I consumed 15 movies last month, where earlier I would have consumed 2. But I only watched one of them in the theater and the 14 of them were watched at home. So my cost per movie is substantially lower, or my overall movie bill for the month is one external movie and all these 14, local, so my overall cost is actually lower than it was 4 or 5 years ago. This is where it's interesting because the same basket is now cheaper. Yeah. So the same food is cheaper. You're just getting it from a different source. The same transportation cost is cheaper because you're using electric. And there's a little more of a boring element to all of this, which is the monetary inflation. We keep thinking RBI is going to print like crazy. The Fed is printed. All this is going to result in inflation. RBI's printing money does not create inflation. There is a difference between a system being something called a deficit and a system being something called a surplus. Now, you have to think of the RBI as a big stone building where nobody can enter. If the RBI prints money, it sits inside there. That does not cause inflation. The money that is created outside of that building is where money is really created. Now, RBI prints money, it expands its balance sheet. So it can print money and buy stuff. Who does it buy it from? It largely buys it from banks. So when it buys something from the banks also have an account inside this stone building. they get the money in their account inside that stone building. That doesn't reflect on the outside at all because they just have money inside of RBI. Now, how do they have money outside? My wager is this: you don't need the RBI at all for inflation to go up. When you have 100 rupees chasing 100 goods, price per good is 1 rupee. If you print 100 rupees more outside, so that the people in the country have 100 rupees more, each good costs now 2 rupees. That means you've had a double inflation on price. This is the same if you think of software engineers in Bangalore or in India.
So it's more money
It's just
with
more
the same
money
level
that's
of
coming
talent.
in.
So therefore, price
Yeah,
per,
it's not like
per year.
the engineers are more productive. It's just that more money is chasing them, so you kind of give more salary. This is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just demand and supply. But it's not the same with, let's say, your household help, your maids or your drivers or
where
your
you don't see
gardeners.
the same level of price pressure.
So yes, so
wage
supply is
pressure.
up 10%, demand is up 10%. So it's not like demand is up, the money chasing people who do gardening is not 2x of what it was. And even if it was, there probably 2x of gardeners would come into the system at that point. So keeping the prices stable. So to that extent, supply and demand is largely
In balance for now.
In balance for now. It's quite interesting to see where the US inflation came from. It was not because the Fed printed. The Fed could have printed to kingdom come. The difference is that the government borrowed more and more money and gave everybody this $1,000,
There was some
$2,400,
payout,
$600 per week. They paid them for about 8 or 10 months, and that is real money. That's money outside of the Fed and the RBI that has actually come into people's pockets, and that's what's caused inflation. India doesn't have the same inflation simply because the government did not print that kind of money to spend. In fact, the government spending has been relatively lower. In fact, going forward, it's very interesting that the government spending on these, giving free money thing is actually even lower. The farm subsidies are lower than in the budget than the year before. Spend that they're doing on NREGA is substantially lower as a percentage increase compared to last year. So, given this, I believe that the useless expenditure, which is just giving people free money, is going away. They're spending more on capex. And capex actually has a resultant increase in productivity. So, if I build a road, I may spend some money building the road, but then more people are able to travel and so on. So, there's productivity benefit that happens. This will change inflation going forward. So the way the government spends money will also change stuff going forward. The banks in general create money. Now, banks create monetary inflation because what they do is, for instance, if a bank gives Shrey 1 lakh rupees as a loan, it adds 1 lakh rupees to Shrey's bank account. So Shrey owes them 1 lakh rupees. But they also say, listen, we have 1 lakh rupees of Shrey's money in a bank account in Shrey's name. So effectively, they have created an asset, which is a loan that Shrey has to repay of 1 lakh rupees, and a liability, which is that Shrey has 1 lakh rupee. So a bank has expanded its own balance sheet by giving a loan. Now Shrey could say Shrey pays Deepak 1 lakh rupees. Now Deepak has 1 lakh rupees in his bank account. Shrey owes his bank. Deepak is owed by his bank, effectively. It's a liability. So the liabilities and the assets of the whole banking system go up according to the amount of lending. This amount of lending has nothing to do with the amount of money that the Fed or the RBI has printed. Where the RBI could keep on printing and the banks can say, I am not willing to lend Shrey 1 lakh rupees because I don't think he's worthy of it. So the banks lend because they're afraid that they won't get their money back and their own capital is fixed. What the RBI does by printing is to say that, listen, if you guys need money, there's money here. And why do you need money? So if the bank lends Shrey 1 lakh rupees, it has to place 4,000 rupees with the RBI as something called a CRR. This is something that in a time when the world is in the Indian system was in a deficit, the banks would struggle and say, listen, I don't have this 4,000 rupees. I need to borrow it from somewhere. They would go to the RBI and say, give me 4,000 rupees at a repo rate. And they would take this 4,000 rupees and keep it as their required CRR. System was in a deficit. Today, the system is in a surplus because banks have way too much money inside the brick wall of the RBI. So they're like, listen, no matter how much I lend, there's enough money sitting as CRR. So I have excess money. So instead of having 4% of what I've lent, I actually have 10% of what I've lent sitting in that stone wall building of the RBI. So I could continue to lend more, but I know what? I don't have enough. So my credit growth in India is only 8%. So to give you an example of where money comes into the system, it comes in from RBI, which prints currency notes. That's about 4 lakh crores, let's say. 4 lakh crores in a system that currently has 200 lakh crores of money. If you add all the money in the system, it's about 200 lakh crores. This 200 lakh crores, they print another 4 lakh crores. That's just 2% more. Then, the whole banks and the system as a whole has lent the government about 100 lakh crores. And, to people like you and me and corporates and all that, another 100 lakh crores. That's the whole system that sits out there. The government has increased its borrowing by about 10 lakh crores. Perhaps we all have increased our borrowing by about 8 lakh crores. This is the total new money that has gotten into the system. The government has borrowed more and has spent the money. We have borrowed more and we have spent our money, and the RBI has printed currency. In all of this, the amount of money that's in circulation is probably about maybe 18 to 20 lakh crores out of 200 lakh crores. That's about 10% more, right? Now you're saying, okay, 10%, that's inflation is 10%. But you know what? Our economy has a productivity increase. That means instead of producing 100 widgets yesterday, we're able to produce 106 widgets today. A barber is able to do 100. The barbers in the country as a whole are doing 200 haircuts versus 180 last year. So there is this productivity increase is what's called the real growth of the economy. The real growth of the economy is about 6%, let us say. This year is a little bit higher because of corona, but let's say on average it was about 6%. 6% of 200 lakh crores is about 12 lakh crores. So in reality, the excess that we've printed is in the economy is only 8 lakh crores. The RBI itself may have printed 25 lakh crores. We don't care, because you know what? Only 8 lakh crores excess is adding to inflationary pressure in the economy, which is 4%. So inherently, monetary inflation is based on how much credit is created in the economy and how much government spending is there, not really about how much the Fed or the RBI prints, which is why the Fed increasing interest rates will affect a system only when the system is borrowing so much that increased interest rates will cause it to borrow less. Coming to this point of whether interest rates increases will actually result in lower inflation, my answer to this is, at this point it appears that inflation seems to be more supply led in the near term. But longer term, if you look at it, the technological impact of larger and larger efficiency increases in the economy means our actual inflation will be substantially lower than we imagine it will be going forward. Interest rate increases will come primarily because of a reactive measure. The reactive measure is simply, listen, inflation is going up, I have to do something, so I'll increase interest rates. Once inflation starts coming down, they'll be you see, what happens when you increase interest rates in the US, for instance, is there will be reduced mortgage interest, and mortgages are a big reason for growth in the US. There is a reduced amount of interest in a number of other loans, including car loans, and you need this part of the economy to continue. If people are going to move to electric, they're going to have to take more car loans in order to be able to pay for their purchase of an electric car, which will save them money. Otherwise, they'll use, the same shitty old car, if you may, which will not save them money. So at some point, if growth gets hampered because of inflation, they will keep the interest rates low. Your problem in the longer term is to estimate whether these are temporary blips in the overall economy, or is there understated inflation increase that should cause your spending to dramatically increase over the long term versus something that's really a short term exercise. I believe firmly that inflation is a short term problem that's led by supply issues that have come as a result of corona and some temporary geopolitical issues, more than the longer term, where if I look at a world that consists of more electric cars, more food production, more efficient technology, I think inflation as a expense number will only come down. The US is probably going to be the forefront of this. India is a lot less efficient than the US. So our efficiency measures will take time to kind of realize, but I think it'll come down eventually. There was a show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in the US. And it's still probably useful because $1 million is a lot of money even today in the US. ₹1,000,000 is no longer
a meaningful
number in comparison to what it was. But I think if today our number is 1 crore that is meaningful, or 5 crores that is meaningful, the next 20 years it will still remain meaningful because inflation is coming down.
So this brings me to my finale and the question where things become more actionable. Given this, how do I think about my investment? So how do I invest more bluntly? Because I get what you're saying. Inflation could change things. Baskets can change things. We had a little intellectual chat about this earlier in the podcast as well. But now on this, tell me how I should actually think about saving my money, because I do have to make decisions.
since we're not talking of investing for the sake of making money, but for the sake of a purpose,
Yes, yes.
then the amount of money I estimate I need may be much higher than I actually need. So if I'm thinking I spend a lakh of money, rupees today, and therefore in 15 years I'm going to be spending 2.5 lakh rupees, it may not be the same basket. It may be the same basket at a lower price. And both of these are very likely because, in the sense, I will have lesser items in my basket. I'll have lesser to plan for kids, rent, to plan for at that time. I will also have a lower expense bill on the same items that I'm spending. I may be spending a little more on a few other things.
Okay.
But by and large, it means that my expenses won't go from 1 lakh to 2 lakhs, maybe going from 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh. If you look at a person and say, well, you know what, your inflation is actually going to be substantially lower. It's going to be 5% or 4% a year. And the amount of money you need is only 4 crores at the end of, say, 15 years. Yeah. It's possible that you say, listen, for 4 crores, I roughly have maybe 1 to 1.5 crores already in maybe an EPF or a bunch of other investments that I've already done. And I'll have more coming in the future. So, you know what? Should I really risk all this money in trying to get the maximum returns I want to get versus I could keep it in a gilt fund for 15 years? And you know what? That 1.5 will become 4 by itself. It's less risky than taking on equity kind of risk. Or I could do a simple index fund. Why do I need to find the most fancy stock in the world? Because my needs can get taken care of by a lot lesser. So, because otherwise, if I told you you need 8 crores, you would say, well, you know what? I need to take more risk. Maybe I need to take less risk, and that less risk will take me there. What this means is you still have the surplus. Now you can do two things with the surplus. You can spend it, and spending is meaningful. Money is meant to be spent, and you can do great things with spending. And that means travel. It could mean buying new things. It could be whatever it is that makes you happy. Um, Having dinner at a fancy restaurant, not worrying about the consequence of it. But you could also do a different thing on the investing front. You could say, listen, at the longer term, I will have enough skills. I may retire, but I need a corpus at the time I retire to be able to set up a business. And that business needs maybe 1 crore to set up. I could now use my surplus money, which I don't need because I've put most of my money in a gilt fund that's going. I could put that into equity, aggressive equity. It could be a mutual fund that I purchase that is aggressive. It could be a equity investment that I do directly. I could use a PMS. Now, this is where we have something to offer, but also you could use AIFs, investing in startups, bunch of other things, and go down that route to say, well, you know what? This is where my long term extra money that I don't need to survive, but I need for this great thing that might just about happen. I could get more aggressive with it. I don't have to worry that can lose money. So it gives you more money that you can lose or that you can spend, which means you can grow it or you can spend it however you want, and without that guilt that I'm taking away from that retirement, simply because my estimate of inflation today is way higher than it actually will turn out to be simply because of these productivity benefits. It opens your mind out to new things. It allows you at a certain level a feeling that I don't have to stop working because just because I have the money doesn't mean I have to stop working, but I can work on stuff that I really want, and most likely that's going to continue to give me an income. And I will tell people in general, it's a great idea to generate a layer of passive income where it involves your passion. So you might be passionate about, I don't know, books. You might write your own book. You might review books on YouTube and set up a channel that is so popular that it gives you additional income. Or it could build you another layer of something that says, well, you know what, with this layer of passive income, I need even lesser money for my corpus to generate during retirement, which gives me more of that money that I can lose, that I can spend. So I can go, do my YouTube channel and go then watch Wimbledon in the most expensive seats possible, rather than sitting 500 meters away and using binoculars to see the.
Yeah, fair enough. But wait till technology gives you some AR version at home and you don't need to bother. So to just put into buckets, maybe this is a slightly interesting take. So it's an asset allocation that might be based on use cases. So your absolute core, I need this much, can be in something as boring as gilt funds, maybe add some corporate debt or whatever. Your maybe the next layer of lifestyle can just be in index funds, And when it comes to like maybe funding your own business or the Wimbledon seats and so on, that can be through something more exciting. I know that's not how we generally tell people to segment their money that they're saving, but it could be one way of thinking about it. So core stuff on debt, slightly more interesting stuff in equity, and more stuff in.
And it really depends on when you started. Some people who started really early in their lives, they've probably generated enough of a corpus to say, well, you know what? Now we could tell them, listen, this is the time you switch over and start spending your money. You know what? We're just getting out of COVID. All of us have been cooped up for years in our lives. We want to spend our money. But at the same time, we have all these fear. Oh, inflation's coming 7.5% US, 1982 se nahi dekha. All this drama that's happening, I think this is noise. We should actually go back to the drawing table and say, things are going to be different going forward. And if we believe in humanity, I mean, the fact that wars don't destroy our entire race, in which case it doesn't matter anyways. But assuming that we don't get layers that just completely destroy our life, I think inflation is going to come down. And you're right, the buckets that you create, you have to reorganize your life into buckets that are easily achievable with debt, more exciting and therefore more meaningful for you to do, which can give you great things that you might want to do in the future. All investing is either it's spending for the future. And really, I don't think most of the people really want to leave money for their kids, primarily because their kids are going to generate so much money, they're not going to want it in the first place. And second, you've generated the money, spend it. I think it's a great pleasure to have. My overall thought process over here is that this helps you. If this helps you think about inflation as it's not as scary as it used to be. I've always said you got to plan for your kids to, say, go to the US for higher education. The US traditionally, and this is me coming from the 1995s, 96s, typically $50,000 to $70,000 a year, yay, XYZ. Now I'm seeing kids come out of online universities and maybe shorter programs which are more meaningful, more useful for life, where there are no equivalent courses. I've just gotten myself an MBA for a regulatory reason, but I think people with no degrees are far better than me in terms of a lot of the financial things. If this changes, what do I do with the $50,000 I've saved? And because my kids come to me and say, you know what, I don't need $50,000. I've done these A, B, C courses, and you know what, I've got the exact job or startup that I want to work with. And I'm like, wait a second, what have I done with all this? I struggled all my life to save you this money, and now you tell me you don't need it. This will happen at some point in our lives. We will save for stuff that we realize we don't need the same amount of money for. And I think, as much as I hate to say this, as a person whose job is to, help people manage money, is that I think we should warn everybody really that maybe you're doing too much as well. And maybe it's not as bad as you think it is.
No, that's a lovely note to end on. You don't necessarily need the ridiculous number of 30, 20 crores to retire. So with that, Deepak, thank you so much. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, please take note of our discount code CM Podcast for a discount on Capital Mind Premium membership. You can see more of our episodes at capitalmind.in/podcast. And while you're on our site, you can learn more about our do-it-yourself and fully managed portfolio managed service at capitalmind.in. Deepak has a book out. It's called Money Wise. It's available on Amazon and Flipkart or at shop.capitalmind.in if you want a signed copy. And if you have any feedback, suggestions, or topics for our next episode, like this one we just recorded, please send over an email to podcast@capitalmind.in. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for listening.